audio was not working. So that should be better now. Oh my goodness. Deep humble bow there for my microphone not working. So sorry about that. That should be working fine now. Okay, so back to it. Question: what keeps you up at night? And can depend a lot on your stage and where you're at. So it could be something that you're just immediately focused on right now, or it could be something that you are just worried about in the broader state of things. Perhaps out in the economy. So let me know down in the comments what is something that keeps you up at night. All right, let's get to the questions. So the first one is a business model question. So I'm known as the shredder of business models. So people ask me business model questions all the time. And this is one that I get pretty frequently. It's like when we're talking about a business model, I usually think about it as, 4 different components, right? There's who is the customer, what's our value proposition to them, how are we creating that value, and then why does this make money? So it's value, delivery, creation, and capture for a customer. Those are the 4 things. And so that was the question we sort of got. And the basic idea, like this was the actual question, is what's the difference between what is the value that we're creating and how is that value delivered? Like what is the value proposition and how is it delivered? Those two things seem pretty similar, and they do seem pretty similar, but there's actually an important distinction between what and how. So in a business model, what is your value prop? And a lot of people make the mistake of conflating how you create the value with what the value is. And that's the confusion here. So if I were to say that what I do is I connect entrepreneurs together, this isn't true, but let's say I connect entrepreneurs together, like-minded entrepreneurs together at the right stages for great good, right? Let's say that there was something like that was the value that I was creating. That's the value proposition to the founder, but I didn't say how I did it. So for example, I could do that just manually. I could do that as a serial networker. I talk to people, I meet entrepreneurs, and I do an intro email and hey, you should meet this person, kind of throw that out there into the world. And that's valuable, that's valid and very real. But a completely different way to do that might be with an app, on the phone. That's like an AI platform, that automatically connects those founders together. And notice that the value proposition itself did not change. The what value I was creating was the same regardless of the method of delivery. And that's the difference between what and how. And this is really important because there are lots of ways to achieve the same value, but the value that you're creating itself, that value proposition, speaks directly to whether the customer has a problem. So if the customer has a problem that is real, that's fantastic, because then you can solve it. And if you can say that the solution is the creation of this particular value, then you're one further step in. But you could still be wrong about the right method of delivering that value. Should it be an app? Should it be a site? Should it be a Slack channel that people belong to, or a Slack community, or something like that, or whatever else that you could come up with to deliver that same exact value. So you want to treat those as a chain. There's a customer with a problem who wants a solution, and then they want this particular solution to the problem and this particular manifestation of it. So that's why it's really important to tease that out. But these things are really tightly connected together. They're not things that you can actually just tease apart, because going back to, let's say, the manual connection between founders, I meet this person and that person, and I say, Sarah, you should meet Jane, and I do an email, and that's a lot of manual work. Whereas if I have an app that just kind of does that on its own, it's considerably less resource intensive. So there's a scale question in there. So when we start talking about the why does this make money question, for example, those two are very, very different, because one of them is going to have a much higher price point, and therefore is probably going to be targeted at maybe a more affluent type of entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs further along in their journey, therefore has access to capital, and they're getting more value out of it. So I just changed the customer and the pricing, all by changing the delivery mechanism, right? Because it does that. Same thing as you can think about if you're selling a physical product. You could sell that physical product in a store, or you could sell it through a wholesaler, or you could sell it online. And all of those can change the actual cost. And all of those are part of that how question. So they are very tightly bound together, but they are different. So when somebody asks about your value proposition, leave the what question, the how you actually create it, separate from that what question, and just answer the what question. And at the end, say, we do this with an app, right? Or something like that, because then you're making a strong distinction between two really important points of the value prop. So That was question number one. That was a great question. I loved that question. So the next question that we've got here is, I'm always telling people to do customer personas because I think customer personas are super valuable. And it tells you like, here's who you're trying to talk to. And I always get the same question every single time I talk about it. I get somebody ask me this question. It's like, you tell me to get more specific, and how specific is too specific? And this time yesterday, it was a solopreneur who asked me this question. Like it feels like we're narrowing our audience down by doing that. Like how much is too much? In response to that question. And so the answer is probably not going to be one that you like, but it's better to err on too specific than not specific at all. And I want to draw up some boundaries on that. So on the one side, on the too broad side, if you're trying to talk to everybody, you're actually talking to nobody because a message won't resonate. So you may have heard it phrased like this before, that marketing is about exclusion. And that's true. What you're trying to do is, if let's take a landing page, for example, is when somebody lands on that landing page, or they see your social post or whatever, and they're exposed to messaging, what you're trying to do is say who this appeals to, so that the person can say that's me. And the way you do that is by saying it's not this person. Right. So think about an example. I'm going to do a dumb one, and we'll just continue with the like entrepreneurs together example. So in that case, we could do something like, are you an entrepreneur struggling to connect with other entrepreneurs? So I'm talking to somebody, but I'm also excluding everybody that doesn't answer yes to that question. And that's the important part here, is that we're saying that it's these people over here, this little wedge, right? But it's not this. It's none of these other ones. Like think Pac-Man, right? So like the mouth is like the small wedge we're going to, and everything else on the Pac-Man is not, right? We're trying to narrow in on who we're talking to by doing that. And the narrower you can get, the more precise that language is. For example, I just said something, I don't remember exactly what I said, but I said something like, do you struggle to connect with other entrepreneurs? What if I said, do you struggle to connect with other like-minded entrepreneurs trying to find traction for their early stage startup idea? That's much more compelling, because now somebody who's listening to that, if they're in that group, they're going to resonate with that much. Oh, like I'm an early stage founder. I'm working on an idea, and I want to talk to other entrepreneurs who are in the same space because I'm looking for that sense of community. And if any of those things don't apply, then the message does not appeal to them, right? So the more specific that you get in the customer that you're talking to, the more your language is going to resonate. And the problem with early stage startups, with any innovative effort really, is that people try to jump to this idea of like, I'm going to create demand. And so that means I'm going to go out and just throw a message into the world, and the world is going to love it, and they're going to say yes. And you can't do that really early on because the market isn't ready yet. You're going after really early stage adopters, and they're a very specific type of customer. And because they're a very specific type of customer, you're actually going out not to create demand, but to find the demand that's already there. And in order to find the demand that's already there, it's a subset of the population that broadly has the problem. So I often talk about that as the early adopter pyramid. Hit me up with a question if you want me to talk more about that. Happy to dive into that in detail next week. But the basic premise is that, there's a universe of people who have the problem, but your early adopters are actually 4 subsets, more narrow than just the people who have the problem. They have to have the problem, know that they have the problem. They have to be actively looking for a solution. They have to hack something together out of spare parts, and then they have to have the budget to do it. So it's always about narrow, 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 narrow. So can personas be too specific? Yes, they can be, but I wouldn't worry about it, because that's not likely to happen. You're much, much, much more likely to have a persona that's too broad. So my advice is, as you're creating your ideal customer persona, as you're thinking about who is the customer that I most want to work with, who most wants to work with you, right? As you're thinking about that audience, go narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow until you start getting really uncomfortable, until you start going like literally at your desk going, right? And get so narrow it makes you uncomfortable, and then get 2 clicks more specific. That's how specific you want to get, because otherwise you're talking to nobody. If you're starting to say like, oh, we do this for everybody, or, we appeal to such a broad, range, know that you're actually setting yourself up for failure. That if you're really appealing to a broad audience, that's amazing, but not yet. Right? It's amazing because it speaks to your scale eventually, but it does not speak to your success now. In fact, if you try to scale too soon, you're just going to fail. Something like 3/4 of all startups fail just because, I think it's 74%, fail because they try to scale too soon. And this is a symptom of trying to scale too soon. So yes, they can be too specific, but please don't worry about it, because it's almost certainly not going to be the case for you. Okay, the third question I got today that just came in a little while ago, and it's actually one that I kind of like here. So I'm a huge advocate of this idea of building in public. So the idea is that on social media, on everywhere, you're loud as possibly can be about exactly what you're working on. You want to be like constantly talking about, this and I did this and I did that, and we're working on this and whatever, because that's how relationships are made. It's how connections are made. It's how you form the community around everything that you're working on. It's how you gain clarity in messaging. And more importantly than any of that, it's just about testing that what you're doing works. So part of building in public is actually getting in front of customers and co-creating your business with them, right? Evolving your business along with the customer. And you can only do that if you're actually talking to them. But a really common criticism, complaint, it was a concern in this particular case, is isn't it risky because I'm giving all of this information out there that makes me really reluctant to share it. So I wanted to talk about that for a second. And there's kind of three ways maybe that I want to come at this, because there's kind of three different parts to this and three different ways it could be risky. And so the default way, and I actually don't think this is what she was asking when she gave this question, but one way that's really common is like, I'm worried about giving all this information out there in public, for then my competitors are going to be able to grab all this stuff and they're going to be able to do what I'm doing. You almost should never worry about that. If you have some true IP, like some serious, like there's this invention that we created, at the university or inside of our company or whatever, and now we have this and it's amazing and we're getting patents for it and all that stuff, that's great. But those are going to be protective of something you're probably not sharing anyway, right? You're not going to go out and say, here's my source code, right? That's not going to be a thing. And while there are some narrow, very narrow exceptions to that, by and large, if this thing's won and lost in a patent dispute, you've already lost, because you can't afford to defend a patent suit against anybody who's going to put you against one. You just can't. So set all that aside. Not legal advice, hashtag, not a lawyer. That's just going to throw my usual disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. Don't take patent advice from me. But the idea that customers are going to come along and steal your idea, it honestly just doesn't happen. And the reason it doesn't happen is because when you're saying, like, I want to do a startup, it is you're going out and saying, I'm going to work harder than I've ever worked for 2 years of my life on something that 3 years from now isn't going to exist anymore. And most people aren't going to do that. You have to have an extraordinary amount of passion, not only for entrepreneurship and the spirit of entrepreneurship, but for the particular idea that you're working on. Like, you have to have a really strong particular passion for the thing that you're working on. And you're going to put this idea out there and somebody else is going to stumble upon it, have as great a passion as you do, and choose to run with that as opposed to anything else. And they're going to execute better than you. Like, all of those things together, it's just, the risk calculation is just so one-sided, because when you start out, and like, the purpose of building in public again is to get validation. So when you're just starting out, the people will say, like, am I wrong about any of this? And the question is, you're wrong about everything. You're wrong about who the customer is. You're wrong about the value prop. You're wrong about the how. You're wrong about the why. You're wrong about all of it. And you're not wrong just in the big picture. You're also wrong in about 100 small details. And so you're facing certain failure with building in secret and then launching in public. You will certainly fail. It's 99.99999% you will fail, right? Versus this tiny risk. I don't know if it's the inverse of that, but some tiny risk that might come from a competitor trying to steal your idea. The math just doesn't work out. It's silly to try to work in stealth mode, absent a couple of very narrow caveats that you are almost certainly not in. So that's one category. It's like, is building in public risky because competition and stealing ideas and anything like that? No, because ideas are not inherently valuable to the execution that matters. The second category is in, this is kind of an easy one to throw out there. So, like, let's say this was a consulting company. So oftentimes they're working inside, their customers' businesses, and they're trying to they have all these details that they need in order to deliver that. And so they deal day to day in their customers' IP. And so, of course, that should not be public, absent, the written consent of, the other party. Again, hashtag not a lawyer. But whatever you work out with them, needs to be in place in order for that to make sense. So don't definitely divulging client IP when you're doing that. But when it comes to the things that are your IP and not your client's IP, like your process, procedures, and everything else, it can only be helpful to get those out and about, because A, there are no such things as original ideas. So somebody else is already doing this anyway. And two, you're only giving yourself an opportunity to have something that that will resonate with customers. So the expectation you set pre-sale will be matched post-sale, which is amazing, right? Here's this process, and doesn't this resonate with you? And they go, yes, I want that. And then you do it for them and they go, that was amazing, right? It all connects. Whereas you can get a disconnection between those things if you get all secret about what you're going to do. It's harder to sell them. And if you do, they don't know what to expect. And so you're not going to have as happy of a customer. So, so second category is like IP from the customer perspective. Don't share that. The third one, which is probably more where this came in from, is like one of the things that I often talk about to build in public about is your business model with regard to like revenue. So I'm working with this kind of customer and I charge this way and I charge this much. And so there are a lot of exceptions to building in public with pricing. So when you're doing it with SaaS really early on, it's probably not important to talk about pricing. When you get further on, it is very important because you're trying to test that. And because it's SaaS, you're trying to test it at scale. So it makes sense. When you're doing consulting, it often doesn't make sense to publish pricing. Sometimes your pricing model isn't based on like we have these 3-tiered packages. It's based on quotes that you do for other people, whatever. And so it just doesn't make sense to publish pricing. So that's perfectly valid. Don't throw that out in public. It's probably not super relevant, maybe, right? Another category in the pricing bucket could be that it is fairly static, but because you have a lot of competition in the space, there's maybe not value in throwing your pricing on the internet because then your competitors can just see it. And so that there are, I mean, as a guy who's run consulting businesses for 20 years, I can say that there are cases for that. I don't think that they're as common as a lot of people do. I think that it's probably, if you're competing on price, I think you've already lost. And I'm just saying this like from my experience running a consulting company. If it's about price, you've lost. And there are exceptions to that. Like if you're serving GovTech, then they can have regulations that are about it being to the lowest bidder, and there's all kinds of stuff there, which is why I never worked with government, but or at least not regularly. But absent those particular things, I think it's probably better to post pricing because you're going to filter out bad sales and you're making a point that we're not competing on pricing. And like an example of that comes from the not service sector would be Starbucks, McDonald's. And I always like to talk about this example. So when, way back in the day, right, McDonald's had their breakfast sandwiches and all that stuff, and they had shit coffee. Right. It was first wave coffee. It was the Denny's coffee, diner coffee, whatever they were serving. It was fast food. Like, what do you expect? Second wave coffee, like Starbucks, and Pete's and all that, start coming onto the scene. And they start, taking some of the people who were just going to the drive-through for a McDonald's coffee off the table because they wanted the second wave better coffee. So Starbucks started stealing some of that, but not a lot because McDonald's was doing the breakfast sandwiches. Well, what did Starbucks start doing, a few years ago, 5-10 years ago, is that they started to offer breakfast sandwiches and croissant and pastries and all that kind of stuff. So now they're like directly attacking McDonald's because now those breakfast people who want the coffee can get better coffee at Starbucks, and they get the food that which was the whole reason they were going to McDonald's in the first place. So then McDonald's launched their McCafe. If you remember those ads, that really annoyed me because they basically take every word and put an E with an accent aigu on it. And don't get me started, Josh. But anyway, they did their McCafe, which was saying, well, we're second wave coffee too. Like we have this good coffee and we have these good breakfasts. So now you can come back here. So then McDonald's started to encroach back on Starbucks' territory and saying like, we're the same thing as Starbucks. We're going to come after that. So what Starbucks did, and this is the lesson here, what Starbucks did in response to that, they already had product. They already had, right? That was all there. They were breakfast sandwiches. They had the pastries. They had the coffee. That was all there. What they did was raise their prices. McDonald's starts nipping at their heels and Starbucks raised their prices. Why? As a signal. That is a signal that like, we're not McDonald's coffee. Like this is better coffee. Like, and it's better because you can tell it's more expensive, right? So they actually raised their prices in response to McDonald's coming up on their heels. And so I say all that to say that that price signaling can be really important, but so can other aspects of that. And that you don't always, and I would argue for all of you out there, probably 9 out of 10 of you should not be focused on competing on price. You want to compete on value that you're creating for your customer. And that could mean that you're going after a smaller segment for more money, or it could mean a number of other things, which would maybe have a more specific conversation about any of those examples. But anyway, so that was a little bit of tangent that I didn't intend to go down, but on pricing there. So, but all that said, at the end of the day, if the thing you're worried about is publishing your pricing for any of those reasons that can be legitimate, like, it's variable pricing, so it's difficult to publish and I don't like to do that, or I'm worried about my competition seeing the pricing, or maybe I haven't figured out pricing yet for a consulting business, and so I don't really want to publish it yet because we're going to figure out in negotiations like what price we're landing on most of the time, or maybe you have to do bids, you have to do like RFPs or responses to RFPs or something like that. In all those cases, like, it's fine to not publish the pricing, but what I would say that you should still publish is not the revenue figure, but the revenue model, or what I like to say, not what you're charging, but how you're charging. Right. So there's a big difference between it's a fee for service versus it's a flat fee package versus it's a SaaS. It's, like a monthly subscription to an app, something like that. So those are all how questions, like how you're charging money, which are different than what we're charging. And because you want to get out there and get resonance with that, because it's really part of your value proposition is how you're actually charging that money. Because there are lots of different ways to do that. So I want to say that. All that is to say that, is it risky to build in public? No. Are there areas where you not want to be 100% transparent? Sure. They're probably a lot smaller than most people think they are. So I just like to throw that out there. So welcome, Jim. Good to see you. Good to see you again. Nice to have you back, late or not. And just as a warning for you, I started this with like the first 30 seconds I had my mic off, so that's brilliant. Got to edit that out. Well, I guess I don't know. Now should I edit it out? Because if you watch this far into it, then you're gonna notice that I did it. But yeah, I'll edit it out anyway. So that's building in public, and that's kind of all I have to say about that. Again, my question for all of you guys for this week, I'm super curious, what keeps you up at night? Like, what is it in your startup journey, your entrepreneurial journey right now that's got you a little bit bothered? Like, what is it that's just in the back of your mind that you can't let go right now? I'm really curious what it is. It could be a problem in your business. It could be something in the economy. It could be something else. Really curious. What are you guys thinking about right now? Let me know in the comments. I really do want to know what you guys are working on. Otherwise, I will be back next Thursday, as I am every Thursday, at 10 a.m. Pacific time to answer your questions. In the description here is a link that you can use to ask me a question, should you want to ask your own question. I'll just throw it up on the screen here just for ease, but you can ask a question. You can type a question, as these founders did, or you can actually record a video question. And if you record a video, I'll just play it on the air and you can ask the question live. But otherwise, that's it for me. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your Thursday, a great weekend, and I will see all of you next week. Until then, goodbye.